Welcome everyone. Es un placer tenerlos aquí esta tarde, esta ya casi noche. Mi nombre es Luis Antonio Pichardo, para ustedes que no me han conocido antes. Soy el fundador y director ejecutivo de DSTL Arts. DSTL Arts is a nonprofit arts mentorship organization that inspires, teaches, and hires emerging artists from underserved communities. Today is the very first day of Conchas y Café. Estamos aquí empezando, fíjense, ya el séptimo año de publicar Conchas y Café. That's 7 whole years of us being here, actually at this library, the East LA Library, which is across the park from us, meeting every Tuesday night and actually working on poetry and, teaching you guys all about the basics of poetry and publishing. So I'm excited to begin the 7th year. Este séptimo año va a empezar como hemos empezado casi siempre con citas y voy a darles una definición sobre una idea, una filosofía, digamos, nueva. If you haven't noticed yet, I do switch back and forth between English and Spanish. This is a bilingual workshop series. So, if there's anything that you need translation on, or if you need me to kind of slow down a little bit, just let me know. Pero ustedes pueden escribir y pueden comentar en el idioma que quieran. Aquí no estamos para decir que solo en inglés o solo en español. For those of you in person, we do have a handout. So, Abraham, if you don't mind, go ahead and pass out the handout there. Se me acabaron las grapas, así que a couple of these handouts have paper clips on them. Son 3 hojas en total. For those of you that are joining via Google Meet, I'll be projecting my handout onto the screen, so you guys will all be able to see what's going on, what we're covering. And the people here in person, you guys can take notes and all of that as well. Before we get started, especially for those of you that are new to Conchas y Café, I want to actually first present to you guys Abraham. Abraham is our now master teaching artist for DSTL Arts. He's going to be working with me part-time throughout the entire year in all of the programs. And he's also going to be teaching some of the Conchas y Café classes with me. So, Abraham, I'll let you kind of just say hi. Camera's out of yeah, pero aquí tienen a Abraham para ayudarles por si necesitan ayuda. Cualquier pregunta, él también les puede ayudar. On Google Classroom, he's also going to be helping me with, filling out the like reviewing your guys' homeworks and stuff like that. So every week there will be a writing prompt that will be assigned to you. El tema de cada semana se puede subir a través de Google Classroom y así podemos, Abraham y yo, darles notas sobre su trabajo. If you don't have access to Google Classroom, which obviously those of you on Google Meet do, but por si necesitan ayuda con accesar toda la información de Google Classroom, la próxima semana voy a tener aquí un set de iPads que van a poder usar durante la clase para poder accesar la información que se sube a Google Classroom. I think that's it. ¿Alguna pregunta? Are there any questions for the time being? All right, I don't see anything on Google Meet. So, for those of you that are on Google Meet, feel free to use the chat feature to also ask questions and things like that. So, aquí les va. Hay que empezar. So, first of all, we're going to start off this week with our quote. Do I have a volunteer here that would like to actually read the quote for us? Puede ser ya sea en inglés o en español. Anybody want to read the quote for us?
Yeah.
I'm reading either on Google Meet or in person. Go ahead.
I'm afraid to take off my mask.
Close. Good job, Miss Lois. It's close. It's an idealist is one who, on noticing that a rose smells better than a cabbage, concludes that it makes a better soup. En español, tengo un voluntario que guste leerlo en español, por favor. Ok, perfecto.
How does cabbage smell?
Perfecto. El idealista es él quien, al darse cuenta que la rosa huele mejor que un repollo, concluye que tal produce un caldo superior. This quote comes from H.L. Mencken, who's an American journalist and essayist. He's also a satirist and a cultural critic and a scholar of American English. O sea, este H.L. Mencken fue una persona que, pues, básicamente estudió toda su vida el lenguaje del inglés americano. Como el inglés americano es distinto al inglés que se habla en, hay que decir, Inglaterra o hasta la India. Es algo distinto. So, he did play around a lot with language, for sure. And he kind of felt a certain sense of like, there was certain things that were maybe better than others, and he used satire a lot to basically get his point across. Pero ¿cómo les parece lo que dice aquí H.L. Mencken? What are your thoughts, everyone? Ms. Lois is saying that it's like the beauty is in the eye of the beholder, which can be true.
I can sit with Anna.
Huh?
You must sit with Anna.
Yo estaba viendo yo normalmente tengo uno en el carro, pero para romperlo otra vez, un chonchito.
So just to sort of reiterate what Mauricio was saying, just to make sure that I did also hear, since there's a little bit of background noise. You're essentially saying that H.L. Mencken was sort of assuming, right, that some people might think that one idea or one object might be better than another, right? Sort of based on the looks or based on, in this case, the smell. Is that correct?
Yeah. Musical chairs.
Copyright.
So, ¿sí me oyeron ustedes lo que dijo Mauricio? So just to sorry, let me just to get everybody here that's in person caught up. Mauricio was saying that what H.L. Mencken was thinking is that, perhaps things, might look or smell better than others, but doesn't necessarily mean that they are better. Correct, Mauricio? Is that an Amisha? Okay, good. Yeah. Sorry, Kathy, go ahead. Yeah.
Things will go back and forth.
Yeah, that could be true. It could also be that H.L. Mencken is making fun of the person that's considered an idealist, right? What is an idealist para todos? ¿Qué es lo que para uno significa ser idealista? Para ustedes, ¿qué es lo que significa esa idea de idealista?
I guess somebody who supposedly has high morals and values.
Someone that has high morals and values? Okay. Mauricio said that it's perhaps somebody that has a view of the world through rose-colored glasses, maybe a bit of naivety, right? ¿Alguien más? Yes, David? Hold on a second.
Pero más positivo, pero tal vez no
Ajá, como no tan realista, pero tiene ideales buenos, ¿verdad? Principios buenos, ¿verdad?
They're opposites, right? When you think about realista,
Sí, quizás sean opuestos, ¿verdad? Las ideas de un realista con un idealista, quizás sí sean ideas opuestas. David, you were about to say you had a suggestion? Yeah. David is saying that it's open to the ideas are different for everyone, right? It's not a universal concept of the rose tasting better because it just simply smells better. Is that more or less what you're saying, David?
also it's about face value and like what possess like different qualities that you just go on to smell.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, yeah. Thank you, David. Yeah, you're definitely talking about the nuances of it. Abraham, you were just saying.
Oh, that's speaks to like just going to pick something just for face value instead of like the actual content of it, which is especially in this context is cooking and you want to get something more. You don't want to be eating roses. Sometimes you can actually eat them.
Yeah. So Mauricio raised his hand. Mauricio? Oh, you're on mute, Mauricio. Yeah. Mauricio is saying that it's also that we understand the cultural context, porque en el contexto de ciertas culturas, es posible que la rosa no sea necesariamente algo que huela bonito o que sea asociado con cosas como de romance o lo que sea, como aquí en los Estados Unidos, por ejemplo, se tiene esa asociación, ¿verdad? So, yeah, that's a very good point, Mauricio. It is important that we understand context. Right? Not everything is going to work in every situation. And, uh-huh. Lois, you froze there. Right. Right. Yeah. Right. So Miss Lois is saying, for those of you here in person, that it's also like a matter of like personal preference. Right? Para una persona quizá el aroma más bonito es la rosa, pero para otro puede ser el jazmín. You know? It's about like personal preference and things that we can all sort of say is, you know, for that particular person, that particular instance, it's appropriate. So I brought this, yo prefiero mi caldo con repollo, yeah, I think that probably that tastes better. But as we think about the quote from Mencken here, you know, it's important to sort of see that, you know, it is really about like the way something is used. You know, it's about it's also about just kind of being, I think, honest with ourselves and our tastes, our interests. Cada mundo, como he dicho, cada cabeza su propio mundo. No, todos tenemos nuestros ideales, nuestros principios, y no significa que sea universal. Pero cuando escribimos es algo que quizás se puede transmitir usando diferentes ideas, diferentes cosas, tal como el metáfora. Right? That's going to be the core of what we're talking about today, is metaphor. So metaphor could be a way in which, you know, we sort of make the idealist see that, you know, maybe the rose isn't the perfect thing for making a soup, but it might be the perfect thing for making a tea, right? Because there is a such thing as rose water or rose tea. So let's go back to our quote, sorry, our handout here. Y les quiero presentar el concepto de simbiosis. Do I have a volunteer that would like to read it for us? Just the symbiosis part. Anybody? Oh, in person? Do I have a volunteer from Google Meet that'd like to read it for us? All right, go for it. Oh, very good. ¿Y en español? Bueno, yo se los leo. La simbiosis viene del griego symbiosis, o vivir juntos, que es lo que significan en el griego. Es cualquier tipo de interrelación biológica cercana o de largo plazo entre dos distintos organismos biológicos, sea mutualista, conmensurable o parasitario. La simbiosis mutualista se define como una relación de largo plazo entre dos individuos de diferentes especies en cual ambos tienen beneficio. So the mutualistic symbiosis is basically like a give-give relationship, right? Both organisms benefit from it. You can think of that as kind of like your average relationship between people, right? Friends, friendship is a form of symbiosis, mutualistic symbiosis. The next one, commensalistic symbiosis, describes a relationship between two living organisms where one benefits and the other is not significantly harmed or helped. So it's kind of neutral, but there is one particular organism that is probably getting more out of the relationship than the others. La simbiosis comensurable, eso quizás uno lo puede ver como una relación entre una persona que siempre lo busca para ayudar, pero quizá no estén siempre disponibles para ayudar a uno. Como el amigo que pide ayuda para mudar, right? Like that moving buddy. So, Abraham, you had
Or also when you have a school project in a group, and somebody else always the person working the most, and the rest of the people just lazy about it. That's basically it.
Yeah, that's a
Been
good
there,
example.
done that.
Yeah.
Well, Mauricio begs to differ. I think he called it a parasitic. Which is possible, right?
I mean, it depends how much they work, right?
Yeah, exactly. It does depend a lot on how they work. Pero, como ven, sí existe ese tipo de simbiosis, comensurable or commensalistic. So that is a type of symbiosis. The third one is the parasitic. La simbiosis parasitaria es una relación en cual el parásito beneficia mientras el huésped se daña. El parasitismo es un modo de vivir extremadamente exitoso. Casi 40% de todas especies de animales son parásitos. That's actually a crazy number. 40% of all animals on this planet are parasites.
So, do humans count as a parasite?
I don't know. Let's open up that argument, right? Let's ask that question. Are humans parasites? ¿Somos nosotros, los seres humanos, parásitos?
At times.
At times. It could be, yeah. Yeah.
Just global warming is the answer to that, right?
Yeah. I mean, global warming, for sure.
My ex.
Yeah, Mauricio threw out his ex. That's harsh. That's harsh. But it's I think important for us to at least understand the concept of symbiosis. Right? Symbiosis, I think, at its core, is relationships between objects, between organisms mostly. Right? But when we're talking about food, and we're talking about the way in which food is developed across the world, it's very possible that symbiosis is one of those things that help actually create the foods that we eat.
Yeah.
¿No? La simbiosis, por ejemplo, sin simbiosis, casi estoy seguro que no tendríamos cosas como la cerveza. Cerveza. Porque sin saber, una vez en el, creo, antiguo egipcio, Egipto, hubo una persona que tuvo un jarro lleno de agua con maíz, creo era, o trigo. Y sin saber se le metió, how do you say yeast in Spanish?
Yeast, ¿no?
Pero se le metió un organismo, ¿verdad? Levadura. Thank you, levadura. Se le cayó levadura y esa misma levadura fue lo que causó la fermentación del trigo en agua. Y así es como luego tenemos, por eso tenemos ahora cerveza. Right? So that relationship between the yeast and the water and wheat, that parasitic, because the yeast actually breaks down the wheat, if I remember correctly. That's what causes fermentation. Or another example is like kimchi. Right? Kimchi is a Korean type of, almost like a dressing that's fermented. So todo lo que es fermentación, todo eso se puede considerar como un tipo de simbiosis. Es una mezcla de diferentes bacterias, fíjense, que nosotros comemos. Y esas bacterias causan que las cosas sepan sabrosas. Right? So going back to our quote, Mencken, he might say that, the idealist might have had this wrong idea about a rose because it smells better, might taste better. But, if that rose went through a particular process of dehydration and then rehydration, that might actually make it taste good. Because sí se pueden comer las rosas. Se pueden consumir de manera como en té, quizá no así entera como una sopa, pero en un té sí se puede comer la rosa. Fíjense. I would not be surprised. Oils are one of those things that, if it is a skunk oil that actually adheres to your body, maybe that's what, perfumes might be based on. Yeah. Simbiosis, en fin, simbiosis es el proceso de básicamente la relación entre diferentes organismos para crear quizá algo mejor o algo nuevo, o para simplemente existir. It is about basically existence when it comes to symbiosis.
Coexisting.
Coexistence, exactly. Thank you, Ms. Cruz. Mauricio, you have your hand raised. Uh-huh. Mauricio just brought up the lichens. It's a type of organism that breaks down rocks. De allí vienen los primeros organismos. Yeah, in my research on symbiosis, that was something that did come up. So very interesting when you think about it. You know, the concept of symbiosis and existence and coexistence, as Ms. Luz so eloquently put. Right? Because that's what it is. You know? That's what it's about. It's about coexistence. Sí, quizá el ser humano sea un tipo de parásito a veces, pero en fin, nosotros entendemos que especialmente cuando se trata de la comida, que es el tema de estos próximos 12 semanas, cuando se trata de comida, no podemos coexistir sin la ayuda de las plantas y las plantas sin nuestra ayuda. Igual como los animales, igual como todo lo que se consume como algo nutritivo. So that's something sort of to consider as we start talking about food over the next 12 weeks for our theme of Conchas y Café. Now, one of the things, too, that's really important for us to understand is the idea of the metaphor and the antithesis. So we're going to go back to our handout for this. Para ustedes aquí en persona, vamos a continuar con metáfora, simplemente para repasar lo que ya sabemos. La metáfora es una cosa reconocida como representativa o símbolo de otra cosa, especialmente algo abstracto. A metaphor directly refers to one thing by mentioning another, and it may provide or obscure clarity or identify hidden similarities between two different ideas. In a way, a metaphor is like word symbiosis. Right? One idea or concept will exist or won't exist because of the words that you use. Metaphors are a way for us to give physical form to something that we might not always be able to. Como la idea del amor, por ejemplo. El amor es un sentimiento, es un concepto, pero no es algo físico. Hablando de, por ejemplo, la cita de Mencken, él dice que el idealista, al oler la rosa, cree que huele bonito, así que en su idea eso se traduce como un caldo sabroso. Para ese tipo, el idealista, la metáfora es olor bueno, es equivalente a algo sabroso, que no siempre es exactamente la realidad, pero para ese tipo, esa es la metáfora. Right? It's maybe kind of an incorrect metaphor, but maybe that's what Mencken was sort of saying about the idealist, is that for them that metaphor applies. Ahora, este concepto quizás sea nuevo para ustedes, el que sigue. And that's on the second page for those of you guys here in person. La siguiente página. La antithesis. The antithesis. So, antithesis is a figure of speech involving a seeming contradiction of ideas, words, clauses, or sentences within a balanced grammatical structure. It's a parallel of expression. Es como un tipo paralelo de expresión. Y este paralelo de expresión se usa para dar énfasis a la oposición de ideas. So that serves to, that parallel of expression serves to emphasize opposition of ideas. So you might be asking yourself, well, what does that really mean? If we look at the quote, regresando a la cita de Mencken, eso se puede considerar como un tipo de antithesis, ¿verdad? La idea de que algo huela bonito es equivalente a algo sabroso. Es una figura retórica que está usando allí Mencken. That is an example of an antithesis. Because essentially what Mencken is saying in the quote is X is happening, right? The rose smells good, therefore it makes a good soup, or instead of the cabbage. But he's saying it in a way where it's very clear that these are opposite ideas. La manera en que lo escribe es exactamente lo que él necesita que escribir para que nosotros entiendamos como lectores que son ideas opuestas. Todos yo creo que al leer esa cita sabemos que un repollo hace un caldo bueno, algo delicioso. But a rose, knowing that it's not something that you can just eat like that, you will know reading that quote that it's an opposite idea to what is being expressed. So, does anybody have any questions? Because I feel like this is a new concept, and it might be a difficult concept to understand. So, ¿hay alguna pregunta? Or any observations? Have you experienced an antithesis before?
It's basically given an idea and you define it as the opposite when you read it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So, do you guys hear Abraham on it? So it's having an idea and defining it as an opposite. But Miss Lois, you were about to say, and then Mauricio.
It's like a little sarcasm.
Yeah. That could kind of work. So Miss Lois is giving the example of a purple cabbage, right? El repollo, color púrpura, tiene el mismo sabor que el repollo verde. Pero lo que ella quiere decir es que, you see, if we were to use that same example as an antithesis, you would probably say something like, the color purple taints the cabbage, making it maybe not as pure of color, but equally pure of taste. Something like that, right? Yeah. So it's in the way that you phrase it. It's in the grammar that you use. So you have to be very specific about the word choice. Mauricio? Un momento, señora. I'm sorry, go ahead, Mauricio.
Después de Mauricio.
Right. Yeah, it's not the same as a paradox or an oxymoron. La paradoja es cuando algo existe sin resolución. Right? So a paradox is a conundrum. It's like a philosophical state of being with no logical explanation. O sea, le falta lógica a la paradoja. An oxymoron is two seemingly opposite ideas that you clearly understand when they work together. The most common one is like military intelligence. That's the most common oxymoron because people don't think that the military can be intelligent, right? So, yeah, or like jumbo shrimp. That's another oxymoron, right? The oxymoron is two words by themselves. So, es un par de palabras, una frase, el oxymoron, que sí coinciden porque la idea está allí, pero son dos palabras que independientemente tienen otro sentido, como jumbo shrimp.
There's nothing jumbo about shrimp.
I know, there's nothing jumbo about a shrimp, it's just a shrimp, right? It's a small thing. Pero señora Ana, ¿usted tenía una pregunta? Uh-huh. 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 Sí, es como una aparente contradicción de ideas, pero aquí el antítesis es en la gramática. La gramática es clave. Por eso la cita con que empezamos, ese es un muy buen ejemplo de ese concepto del antítesis. Pero además tenemos un poema que lo enseña. So. Speaking of the poem, let's go ahead and move on to the poem. So just to sort of reiterate, right? If you want a good example of an antithesis, a good example is the quote that we started with. That is antithesis in action. You can also think of it a lot of like as almost like sarcasm. So el sarcasmo, el concepto, el uso de sarcasmo es como un tipo de antítesis también. Cuando uno habla con un poco de piquete, ¿verdad? Es como hablar de manera de antitética.
Hacen pan y pláticas, mira, interesting.
Yeah? Oh, okay. Jessica says, I ordered a Big Mac, I'm assuming, and a Coke with less sugar because it's all about the diet. Yeah, Big Mac. Yeah, that's another example of like an oxymoron, right? An oxymoron is like a Diet Coke with a Big Mac, right? Because you don't want to add on extra calories. But you're, eating a Big Mac that has like 3,000 calories, right? So that's kind of like an oxymoron. Not quite the antithesis, but it's in the general region. That's understandable. Oh, there you go. Sweet and low with the Diet Coke. So adding more sweetener to something that has no sugar. Yeah, that's there's an irony to that. Right. So, going on to the poem. So, aquí el poema de esta semana viene de Adrienne Sue. Adrienne Sue es la autora de Living Quarters, que salió en el 2015 y da clases en Dickinson College y vive en Carlisle, Pennsylvania. This is an excerpt, so this is not the whole set. This is a part of a longer series of poems. It's 4 sonnets total.
So the middle, the beginning?
So this is the beginning. So this is the very first one. It's number 1. Do I have a volunteer that might be interested in reading it? Mauricio, go for it.
All right.
Thank you, Mauricio. Anybody in person want to read it for us in English? Okay, Ms. Luz.
Our sonnets about food. Sue. Words can't do what bird bones can. Stew. To the stony essence of one small soul, the spent, sacrifice boiled down, to the hard white matter that nourishes the mighty predator who flourishes on the slaughtered animal and water.
Excellent. Thank you, Miss Luz. ¿Y en español? Tengo aquí un voluntario que busca leerlo en español. Señora Ana.
Las palabras que pueden hacer que los derechos de las aves esencia para esencia de menor, no manda pequeña. El sacrificio gastado en estacionar con el más allá, el gran depredador, los derechos del animal y agua sacrificada.
Muy bien, gracias, señora Ana. All right. So, para ustedes en Google Meet se los voy a leer una vez más en español. 4 sonetos de comida. Número 1. Las palabras no pueden hacer lo que huesos de aves pueden, cocerse, hasta la esencia pedregosa de una alma pequeña, el sacrificio gastado y hervido, hasta quedar como masa blanquiza que nutre el gran depredador que florece del animal y agua sacrificada. ¿Cómo les parece este poema?
Definitivamente parasítico.
¿Parasítico?
That sounds good.
Yeah, perhaps.
The mighty predator, right?
The mighty predator. You know, that might be a way of looking at it, right? This is maybe describing a parasitic relationship. ¿Qué piensan ustedes en Google Meet Land? What do y'all think? Yeah, definitely not. This is about food, right? So. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great observation, Ms. Lois. Ms. Lois is pointing out the idea that, you know, this is using bird bone to create a stew, right? Para ustedes que han hecho un caldo, típicamente se usa un hueso para darle sabor al caldo. So the idea of breaking down something so that you get the essence out of it, I think that is a big part of what this poem is saying. But the relationship is an interesting one, isn't it? La relación entre el animal, en este caso un ave, y su depredador, es algo interesante, es algo que por lo menos para mí me fascina esta idea de que existe una relación entre lo que se consume y el que está consumiendo. Jessica in the chat here wrote, "It gives being a predator power. Food is power and strength." And Mauricio is commenting that it could be a mutualistic relationship, right? If the bird is injured or in pain. Let's be real though, how many of us actually go out and hunt a bird to eat it? As humans?
KFC, does that count?
Yeah, you could eat a pigeon. Yeah, that's true. It's true. You know, baby pigeon is delicious. I don't want to know how you know that, obviously. But, you know, if we think about it, who is the predator that's being described in this poem? ¿Cuál es el depredador?
Us.
Us.
Yes.
Right.
Because we're having chicken soup.
We're having chicken soup. Yeah.
Hi, what is happening?
Class.
A what?
Poetry class.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
I saw one of your things on TikTok.
Sorry, everybody, hold on a second.
I'm sorry.
I speak there.
Yeah, but yeah, if you'd like, Abraham can tell you a little bit more.
Chicken soup for the soul, says Mauricio.
Chicken soup for the soul, yes. Yeah, no. Yo creo que lo que se está describiendo en el poema es quizá un caldo de pollo. You know? If you think about it, right, it probably is that. It is the description of a chicken soup. So, but it's an interesting way of talking about the relationship that we have with our food, you know? Cuando uno piensa de comida, ¿qué es lo que piensa cuando se trata de la relación? Yes? Yeah, that's a very good observation. What Jessica is saying, lo que acaba de decir Jessica es que en el contexto del poema se puede quizá interpretar que el pajarito, en este caso quizá un pollo, está diciendo, miren, ustedes los seres humanos son tan grandes, tan fuertes como depredador, pero me necesitan. Un pobrecito avecito, un pollito indefenso, me necesitan para que ustedes puedan sobrevivir. Right? Hasta el hueso me necesitan. Right? So that's a lot of power that I think the little bird is proclaiming. No? Mauricio, you raised your hand. Yeah, because again, don't forget, right, that this poem starts off by telling us that words can't do what bird poems can. Right? That's the basic idea, that's the setup. So aquí, esta es una observación muy astuta lo que acaba de hacer Mauricio. Aquí tenemos un ejemplo de la antítesis, especialmente porque el poema empieza con el concepto, con la frase, que las palabras no pueden hacer lo que los huesos pueden. Esa frase y luego lo que sigue es lo que se puede considerar como antítesis. So it sets up immediately from the beginning this idea of opposites. Right? We immediately know that there is an opposite relationship going on between words and bones.
Pues si uno es comida para la mente y el otro es comida para el cuerpo.
Yes.
Exacto. Exacto. For those of you that might not have heard, Miss Luce just said it, I think, on the dot. Right? Words are for the mind, right? They're nutrients for the mind. But food is the nutrient for the body.
That's just nourishment.
It's nourishment.
That's another key word.
Right. So, yeah. So here, the antithesis is exactly what I'm saying. It's immediately and very deliberately setting up the poem to say, words can do this, but words cannot. And that's the key word, cannot. Esa es clave, esa frase es clave. Las palabras no pueden, igual como los huesos. Mm-hmm.
Pretty subtle.
Yeah. That's when he did the miracle with the fish and the bread, right? Yeah. So, yeah, that's I think a great way of looking at it. You know? But again, here the antithesis, which is the real tool that we're learning today. The antithesis, the key word is cannot in the case of this poem. The key phrase, words cannot do what bones can. So us knowing that from the very beginning sets up the rest of the antithesis. And I see here in the chat from Ayan. Ayan writes, feels like it's also asking us to consider or reconsider our relationship with nature. Parts of the writing sound really beautiful, and I think the question of what kind of relationship we are in with the earth, parasitic or mutualistic, is one about what our social relations are. Our social systems influence our relationship to food. And Rachel wrote, it's psychological versus physical. I'm assuming that's in the case of words versus food. Right, Rachel? Yeah. So, yeah, I think that everything that's been said so far by Ayan is on point. By Rachel, you definitely hit it on the head. Cuando se trata de este poema, yo creo que lo que el poema nos quiere hacer comprender es que hay diferentes relaciones que tenemos con diferentes cosas, right? One relationship that we have with words is about our mind and our soul, whereas the other relationships that we have with things that are not words, like food, it's about our body and our nourishment. But maybe even a little bit about our soul too, right? Because food does transcend not just our bodies, right? Food can transcend other areas of our life. It goes into our culture, it goes into our habits, it goes into our emotional well-being, right? So todos tenemos diferentes relaciones con la comida. Quizá a unos nos gusta más cuando estamos estresados, ¿verdad? Por eso yo sé que para mí ese es un problema, right? When I get stressed, I overeat, and that, and it gets harder for me to lose weight. But that's my relationship with food, and that's something I have to manage, right? So just like Ayan said, it is about our social place, right? There are social aspects to food too. Mauricio wrote, our economic systems too, right? They does create cultures, wars, etc. Yeah, so si uno vive, como dice Mauricio, por ejemplo, si uno vive en un área que quizá no tan, digamos, bonito, ¿verdad? Económicamente hay más gente de los bajos rangos que hay que decir Beverly Hills. Hay diferentes tipos de comidas que se pueden comprar, de diferente calidad. It's unfortunate, but that is also another thing too that affects our relationship with food. So, el contexto en que hablamos de la comida siempre va a ser todo para nosotros. Pero al último, here talking about the antithesis, we're looking at, ways in which we can talk about our relationship with food and maybe understand it as being maybe a parasitic relationship, maybe a commensalistic relationship, or maybe it's one where we all benefit, where it's mutualistic, right? Do you have any questions? ¿Alguna pregunta o algún comentario?
Hablando de
Sí, nos enriquece la comida igual como la poesía, ¿no? So, Jessica writes in the chat, that's interesting because they kind of go hand in hand. Great Depression, present-day obesity, abundance of options, now delivery too, the relationship will change again. Economics and food, yeah, that's very true. Now that we can have, something delivered straight to our doorstep, right? That also changes our relationship with food because we're sort of disconnecting from it. Ya que ahora tenemos cosas como Uber Eats o DoorDash, eso quiere decir que uno ya ni siquiera tiene que ir al mercado a comprar su comida. O sea, puede quizá en el futuro, puede causar como una desconexión, ¿verdad? Con la comida. Y hasta puede cambiar otra vez nuestra cultura gracias a eso. Entonces es interesante pensar qué tipo de relación tenemos con la comida. So. Yeah. So, while we're looking at different possibilities, yeah, maybe, you know, if we're all eating out of tubes. All right. So, any final questions? ¿Algún último comentario?
Para la tarea, ¿se la puede ver el video o se la manda por email?
Como quiera. Si se tiene que ir,
Yo ya se lo paso.
ok.
Ya se la paso. La tarea.
So, yes, Miss Lopez?
No quiero que te den la ley. ¿Seguro? Sí. Venime a buscar.
¿Cómo agarrarás?
Sí.
¿Qué va a agarrarás?
Ya.
Yeah, I would think that that's relevant. I mean, anything that we can eat, right? If you, like, even walk up to a tree and you pull off the bark off of it, you know, if it's consumable and you are the one actually doing the like the harvesting of it, I don't see why that wouldn't be maybe a parasitic type of relationship, you know, but it could also potentially be a mutualistic one where you benefit from eating the bark and the tree benefits from, you know, losing dead bark that it no longer needs. Like, that could be a potential way to look at it, right?
That chicken only needed one leg.
Like a chicken eating only one leg. Yeah, I don't know about that might not necessarily be very beneficial to anybody. You know? Yeah. Yeah. Well, so for my people here in person, you know, what Miss Lois just mentioned is like, say, medicine, right? Medicinal herbs and other types of plants that we can consume for our benefit, for our health. Even if you think about it, any type of vegetable is just like that, right? It all works to benefit our bodies. And there are certain things where, like, if you know, if you're harvesting it, you're helping it actually grow back even stronger. You know, like, right, it does. It helps reproduction. You know? Yeah, exactly. If you think of like a bird, for example, you know, a bird will oftentimes go to a fruit tree and it will eat the fruit, seeds and everything. And then later, you know, it'll poop and it'll drop the seeds within its poop. And that actually acts as a fertilizer. And so when that poop, you know, so that's another way, right? And that's another way to look at it. You know, that's just gonna then only once you start looking at the chain of food, right? Food chain, you know, you start thinking, well, if I'm eating the bird that is also pooping, you know, the fertilizer and the seed, you know, from the fruit that it ate, right? Like, there's like this whole circle of life thing happening, you know, and we all ultimately benefit from everything, from all aspects of our ecosystem. Yeah. Mauricio, I think I thought I saw you raise your hand. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's a good observation. And Mauricio is bringing up the dandelion, which most of us think of the dandelion as a weed, something we want to get out of our garden. You know, it's an invasive species, but you know, for some animals, you know, and for other, for even our own benefit, right? We can make it into a tea and we can consume it. So yeah, ideally we would all benefit from you know the food chain, as Jessica is saying in the chat. So I have one last page to our handout. So here, for those of you that are looking on the screen and for those of you in person, the last page that we have is a map. Right, so this looks familiar, maybe for some of you that have been with us for a long time. But this map actually shows you the origin of a lot of different types of foods that we commonly eat now. If you look in North America, for example, you have things like blueberries, strawberries, squash or pumpkins, and I think that's a sunflower. So like sunflower seeds, right?
Yep.
And sunflower oil. We can also use sunflower oil. If you look at like Mexico and the Caribbean, you know, it's the home of the chile, home of the papaya, maize, you know, or corn, chocolate, squash, avocados come from Mexico and Central America. Vanilla, I believe, does too.
Yeah.
So, you know, you have all sorts of different foods that come from all like a great variety of places. And, you know, this might speak to your culture. You know, I know that for me as a person of Mexican descent, I love my chilito. You know, I can't have any kind of food without some kind of spice. You know, so yeah, you know, like yeah, I mean, but you know, it says something about our culture, right? Miss Lois, you know, you may not necessarily be Mexican, but you know, you do live in the Southwest. Um, you know, you might have ancestors that you know are from the Caribbean, certainly from Africa. And if you look at the foods that come from these different places, you know, you can see that they definitely have an influence on our culture and our relationship with food, right? So I'm basically providing this map to you so that you can think about your relationship with food. Maybe it has something to do with, you know, where you live or where you grew up or where your family comes from. But what I would like you to do, and this is going to now tie into your homework assignment for this week, your writing prompt for this week is to think about your relationship with food and, if possible, use antithesis to compare your relationship with food to your relationship with writing, with poetry. And these have coffee beans too, yes, they do. So I'm going to repeat that writing prompt for you one more time. Think about your relationship with food and think about your relationship with writing and try to use antithesis to say what one can do and what the other one can't do. All right? In the chat. It'll get posted with the video in Google Classroom. So you'll be able to see it in Google Classroom as well. Yeah. And that might be a better way to actually see it too. Yeah. So are there any final questions that anybody might have? Thank you, Mauricio, for writing it in the chat. All right. Well, I think that does it for today. So if anybody has any final questions, you know, feel free to post them in Google Classroom. Those of you that showed up today in person, thank you. I very much appreciate seeing you guys here today. You know, makes my trip out here worth it. And yeah, we'll hopefully be doing this again in person next week, 6:30. I'm gonna try to get the same spot that we were in today. And for those of you joining through Google Meet, welcome. I'm very happy to see you all. Feel free to use the chat. If you're on Google Classroom, feel free to use the stream in Google Classroom to ask your questions. And we'll be in touch soon. You'll see the recording of this video up on YouTube and Google Classroom in the next few days. The same goes for all of you here in person. Thank you all. Have a good night. Take care. Bye.